Good morning, or good afternoon. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. It is my esteemed honor to welcome all of you to this afternoon's presentation of The Women Who Influenced Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass is a well-known Black and American history figure and arguably the most poignant voice for racial justice in the 19th century. He was not just vocal regarding the rights of African Americans in the United States. Douglass was also an early and avid supporter of women's rights within this nation. He attended the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, and Douglass held such power and influence that he was the only African American in the room at that time. You can't hear me? Is this better? Is that better? Can you hear me better now? All right. Okay, yep, I can do that. Do you want me to, I'll just start over, and then that way we'll be all on a good page. It is my esteemed honor to welcome all of you to this afternoon's presentation of the women who influenced Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass is a well-known Black and American history figure and arguably the most poignant voice for racial equality and racial justice of the 19th century. He was not just vocal regarding the rights of African Americans in the United States, but Douglass was also an early and avid supporter of the women's rights movement. He attended the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, and Douglass held such power and influence that he was the only African American present at that convention. He was able to encourage a room full of doubters to actually put women's suffrage on the to support women's suffrage and put it on the ballot. He spoke very eloquently about the role of women in his life, as well as the power and importance of women voting in a free and fair society. And after giving that speech, where he had a room full of doubters, actually a majority of them actually voted to pass this resolution. He eloquently defended women's suffrage, saying that the world would be a better place if women were involved in the political sphere, and I believe that he is correct about that. Douglass believed that liberation in America could not be achieved without African Americans or without women having the right to vote. He publicly supported women's suffrage and abolition in his paper, The North Star, and he was always careful to uphold the value of women in a free society. And little known fact or fun fact about Douglass, he actually spoke at St. James AME Zion Church here in Ithaca in 1852, if you all are familiar with that church down the street. As we will learn in this afternoon's program, Douglass did not arrive at women's importance in society by accident. His life was shaped by powerful women who reared him, supported him, taught him, and worked alongside him. We will learn of his grandmother, who raised him before he was sold to the Auld family. We will hear of Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, who were church members with Douglass at the African American Methodist Church, or Zion Church, when Douglass arrived to New York State. And we will hear the story of his wife, Anna Murray Douglass, who helped him obtain freedom. On behalf of the First Unitarian Society of Ithaca, it is my pleasure to welcome the Akwaaba Heritage Associates and the rest of the Ithaca community to today's presentation. May we all be enriched by the stories that we hear.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ruth Anderson from Rochester, New York. I'm Executive Director of Akwaaba, the Heritage Associates. Lindsay did such a beautiful job. I don't really need to add to that, except to say that there were a number of women in Douglass's life who influenced him in various ways. And he would not be the man that he was without these women. And Akwaaba is bringing you our presentation today of some of the women who were very, very influential in his life. and helped him to be able to do the work that he did, not only here, but in Rochester, where he spent 25 years of his life. So you will hear from them, and after the presentation, if you do have a question that's just burning in your soul, you will have an opportunity to ask the women questions in character. All right? Thank you for inviting us. I'm glad we were finally able to get here, although when they said it was going to be raining so much, I thought, oh no, we can't change this again. So thank you again for the invitation.
There will be a reception afterwards, and there will also be a basket where free will donations will be accepted. So, thank you.
My name is Betsy Bailey, and I grew up on this plantation. I've been on this plantation all my life. As a little child, it was my job to take the water out into the fields for all the workers to drink. Now that bucket was heavy, and until they figured out to bring a little wagon, that was a tough job. And you couldn't get to people quick enough. They were so hot and thirsty. And as I got older, I became a seamstress and a midwife and a lot of other things. I was never a cook or anything like that. But now that I am so much older, it's my job to take care of the little ones. Now, they can't free me because there's a law that says you can't free old people anymore. But they put me out in a little cabin a distance away from the big house, along Tuckahoe Lake, Tuckahoe River. So I stays out there and I bring up the little ones. And it's a joy to bring them up. They run around and they're playing and they're having a good time, but they don't know what I know. They don't know what they're about to come into. So while I have them, I teach them all I know. I teach them how to fish, and I teach them how to grow some food, and I teach them how to take care of themselves. Because I never know what's going to happen to them once they leave my little hut. I have no idea. But I know what it could be like. And I know people have different outcomes once they leave. So it's my job to make sure that they know as much as they can. Now I have one little grandson. I'm sure you might have heard of him, little Frederick. Frederick, he's a smart one. He asks all kinds of questions. What is this? What is that? How come it takes food so long to grow? How come when you leave, Grandma, it takes you so long to get back? And I tell him, you know, I help women birth their babies. I never know when it's going to happen and how long it's going to be. But the little ones, they get worried. They get very worried about their old grandma. So I try to do things as quickly as I can, and I try to please everybody. You just can't do it. You can't do it. So little Frederick and I, we would go out and we'd catch some fish sometimes, and he asked me, how come we ain't get no fish today, Grandma? Well, they not biting today. And he'll say, Grandma, how long is it gonna take that corn to grow? I say, you got a long, he just put the seed in. You got a long time, a long time. But the hardest part of my job, the hardest is to take them up, youngins up to the big house. Saddest days of my life. Now the youngins, they don't know. These little children, they love going up to the big house because they get to see a part of the world they never saw. All they've ever seen is my little hut and the property all around it and whatever I happen to be growing. But they never seen all the horses and all the machinery and all the workers out in the field. This is new to them, and especially that little Frederick. He wide-eyed as he can be. Oh, Grandma, look at that. Look at this. And all the while, I know what's about to happen to him. Once he get to that big house, no more fun and playing games. So for me, it's a long, slow, sad journey. All the while, they hipping and hopping and skipping around, and Grandma, look at that. Grandma, look at this. But Frederick was smart enough to let me teach him a lot of things. He was conscious of other people around him. He watched the way they walked and the way they talked. And he really, really learned to read. Of course, I can't teach him. None of us on this plantation here can teach him, except for the white folks. And that wasn't happening that I know of. So Frederick, he listened as much as he can and do as much as he can to get by. And that's the job that I had for these youngins, to help them to get by as best they can. Now, it was said that he used to sing for his supper. He was singing outside the window one day, and the plantation ordered his daughter fix him some bread and butter. And after that, he knew to sing every afternoon at that time, and he'd get him some bread and butter. But things were going to be different for him. Now, when he left, and I walked him up to that big house, I sat there and talked to my cousin, who was the cook in the big house, a little while. And I had to wait until he was so distracted that he couldn't see me leave. So I talked to her, and then when he wasn't looking and was so involved in playing, I would sneak out quietly. But I wouldn't get halfway past the lawn when I hear, "Grandma!" and the tears coming down his face. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was. I know his cry. "Grandma! Grandma!" And he was crying, and all the other kids, they already knew, because they've been through this, so they knew. And they were teasing him a little bit, and I didn't like that. But I couldn't go back. I had to keep on walking. I had to keep on walking, because Lord knows what I'd done if I had to go back in that house. So this is what it was like for me. Teaching the kids all I know, and bringing them to the big house, and slipping away quietly while they got distracted, and then knowing I will hardly ever see them again. I was giving them a lot of kisses that day and hugging them. And I had to be careful that it was not unusual, that it was like a usual thing. So I started a little early every day. A couple days before I need to go, I would hug them and kiss them and tell them how much I loved them, and that you can grow to be strong and healthy, and you never know. Well, sometime after little Frederick left, I went out into the field to help a woman birth her baby, and those that came to see about her, they told me that little Frederick went to Baltimore. I was told he was doing good in Baltimore. I don't know. I have no idea. But I know one thing. I know that I taught him well enough that he can survive and that he would be able to handle what comes his way. No, Frederick doing good. I know this because I know he can take care of himself. Taught him everything. everything. However, life goes on. I got to keep moving on, keep training children to do what I can do, and for them to do whatever they can do to survive and keep moving on.
Good evening. Good evening. I wonder, as I look around, I said, Sojourner, you sure you getting ready to speak in front of folks? Many times when I come out to speak, me and Fred Douglass was pretty much on the same mission. We were speaking for equality and justice. Now, Frederick calls this thing slavery, a peculiar institution. But I say it's intemperate spirit that makes he who drinketh it a robber and a thief that tries to steal your soul. My name is Sojourner. Now, I was not born Sojourner. Now, I was born there around 1797, right here in the state of New York. I was born in it, and I was a slave in it. Now, I was born in a place they call Hurley, Ulster County. Y'all might have heard of a place like that. And we were the property, me and my pa and Mama Bet, the property of the Hardenberg. I didn't even speak English. The only thing I understood was Dutch. Now, I had about 11, 12 other siblings, but I never seen but one. That was my little brother Peter, who is younger than me. Now, I don't rightly recall the older Hardenberg, but I sure remember his son, Charles. When his pa died, crossed over to the other side, he gathered all of his slaves in the cellar of a big old house. That was a miserable life. We all were in the same area. It was cold and dark and damp, no windows, just a few little slits on the wall, and it seemed to me like the sun never shined and come in through those. In the wintertime, it was wet and cold. We just slush around and throw hay on the ground to sleep on it. Women and men and children. Now, in the summertime, we would be outside, and that's when my mama Bet would try to prepare me for what might come to me later on in life. And we would sit up under that heavenly vault, and Mama Bet would teach me and Peter, my little younger brother, how to pray. She'd tell us about her other children who were sold or given away. And one time I noticed Mama Bet crying to herself, and I asked her, Mama, why do you cry? She said, I have much to cry for. But she was looking up at the stars, and she said, I had so many of my children taken away from me, sold away. And she is hoping that when she look at the stars, that when they look up in the sky at night, they know that their mom is looking up at the same stars that they be looking at. Well, you know, it's hard for a slave woman to prepare her children for what's going to happen. For too long, the old man, Charles Hardenberg, he crossed on over to the other side. All his property was given away. And at 9 years old, me, Belle, that's the name they give me, it was Isabel, but then the owner called me Belle. So no matter where I went, I didn't have another name. I was whoever the owner was, that was my first name. So I was a Hardenberg Bell. Then I was sold at 9 for about $100. And it seemed as though it was a lot of sheep, but they didn't speak no Dutch. So I suffered plenty evils. All they spoke was English. And they didn't understand me, and I didn't understand them. Well, for too long, maybe sometime after that, they sold me to a skiver. Now, he speaks some English, and I was sold, I remember, for $105 to the skivers. Well, as time went on, I become about maybe 13 years old. I don't regularly know when I was born. I don't know if it was in the winter or the fall or the spring or the summer, but I know I was here. I was here. And I was sold to the Duma. So there again, not only was I Hardenberg Bell, Skiver Bell, Neely's Bell, now I was Dumont Bell. That's where I growed and come into being grown up with no help, nobody to tell me nothing. But I remember, just like the sister said, everything that Mama Bet tells me while I was a Hardenberg Bell. Work hard, tell the truth, and always know that the only person who could help you is God. So always pray. So there are many times that I had to sort of go off to my little sanctuary and talk to God. Because see, me, I talk to God, and God talked to me. And if I listen to everything that God tells me and wait on him, it always come out okay. But not all the time, Sojourner or Bell would wait on God. And when I don't, things don't turn out all right. Well, New York State, they got all kinds of laws. I don't know how they keep up with it myself. They write laws. Then they have something they call amendment. Is it amendment? They keep mending and mending and mending. Now there's something in the Bible tell you that to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under the heaven. I can't understand why they keep tearing up things and have to mend it back together again. If they do it right the first time, they wouldn't have to do so much mending. If they speak for justice and equality with all people. Well, I'm going to tell you, for too long I had some children, had a husband, what they call a husband, and some children. And I'm going to tell you two things that happened to old Bell. Bell owner, Mr. Dumont, promised me that he would let me go 1 year before slavery was over in this here state of New York. If I work hard, which I always worked hard, did everything I needed to do, he would let me go 1 year before slavery, before emancipation here in this state. Well, Dumont changed his mind. And when that time comes by and he didn't come to me, I waited and I went to Dumont. Wouldn't you know, Dumont felt that I did not work as hard in that 1 year that I should have. I worked in the fields and in the big house. But he noticed that my finger was sort of disfigured, I guess you'd say. And he couldn't imagine how I could have worked and did the work I should have done with an injured finger. Well, I went and did what I thought that I should do before I decided to leave. And again, I go to my sanctuary. I talked to God, and God talked to me. And you know what? Early one morning, before the sun comes out, by that time I'd had a little baby, Sophie. I decided I didn't run away, because that wouldn't be right. I walked away from that Dumont farm. And I ended up with some people, good people, Van Wagoners. And they were the best people I had seen in all my life. And at least I had two names, Isabella Van Wagoner. Because Mr. Dumont come try to take me back. But they paid for me and my baby. Now the other thing that happened, while I'm staying there with the Dumont, with the Van Wagoners, Mr. Dumont sell my little baby boy down south. Now he wasn't supposed to do that. But old Isabella Van Wagoner walked them dusty road of Hurley, New York, and fought until I got my baby boy back. I said, none of my children, like they did my mama Bet, sell and take your children. Don't they know that slave and colored people love their children just like they do? Well, I got my little Peter back. And me and Peter ended up in New York City. I tried to work with some people there and helping the people. But I think I got into something almost like a cult. And I had to fight for my name because they blamed me for something that I didn't do. They want to say that I poisoned one of the preacher people. But I didn't do that. And you know, since I won my case in Hurley, New York, I figured God was going to help me to set my name right in New York City. But it seemed after a while, it seemed as though I didn't even belong there. I started praying more, spending time in my little quiet time with God, talking to God, and God talked to me. Then I wait and listen, because sometimes I figured out when I moved before God moved, it didn't work out right. But I went to a prayer meeting one night, and they prayed, and we sang and we prayed. And I don't know if it was in a dream or in a deep sleep, but something comes to me, and I tells my owner, Miss Whiting, who I was working for, that I was going to find me a new home and a new name. She thought something was wrong with me. But that morning, I packed up a few little things in my little knapsack, because that night, God tells me to go east. I was in a little trouble, but when I listened to what God tells me, things work out pretty good for old Sojourner. Well, I got a few little coins, one to pay Caesar, and I left Miss Whiting's house, and I didn't look back. I didn't want to turn into a pillar of salt. So that I keep walking on that Long Island, working and working. I know what I wanted for my life. Some people tried to make me stay. Stay, Belle. Stay. Don't leave, Belle. We will do this. But as I was walking along that Long Island, and some woman tried to, I don't know if she was trying to see if I was telling the truth, asking me my name. And I keep giving her my name. But in all that questioning and she trying to twist it into here, but it just comes to me. This is true as God is true, that my name would be Sojourner. Then I asked, I wanted two names. And you know, God gave me the name Truth. And Sojourner Truth travels the land. And I showed him an example of what it is to be in slavery. So I traveled the land, and I tell them the truth. Now, y'all are a good audience. Most time they don't even want me to talk, and I have to sing a song or either read something from the Bible. But if they didn't want me to talk, and no, I didn't read, but I know the Bible. Because I know to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. But how I met Fred Douglass, with all that planting and plucking up and moving forward, we ended up in a place called Northampton, Massachusetts. That's when I met that young Frederick Douglass. Smart young man. And everybody was on one accord. It was no little one or no big one. Some could read, some couldn't. But we were for the same thing. Justice, equality for all. And all of that amendment, we don't need all that. Not about no women's rights and this rights. I am for everybody having their rights. So it's no use in tearing up things and trying to mend it back together. Because if we move together, that's what I would tell them. Why you want to take something that belongs to me? My strength is not your strength. And I guess wasn't too many colored people going around to speak for the colored woman. But I was pretty much the only one. And most of the time, they didn't want me to speak. But I was always polite. I would ask if I may speak. Sometimes I might have to sing a song, or sometimes I have to say something but the Bible. And I learned, you sing a hymn, and you say something from that Bible, and whoever the heathen is, I think God just sort of brings something down on them. So me and Fred, we were at the same spot, doing the same thing, wanting the same thing for everybody. Not that men have rights and women don't have it. Because if you give the man rights, then they're not going to treat the woman right. And if you give the white one all the rights and the colored one don't have no right, then you won't treat it that. But if you have one brush, everybody have the same rights, then you won't have to worry about it. Because it is a time for everything under the heaven. It is a time to cast away and a time to gather stone together. A time to love and a time to hate. A time to speak and a time to be silent. But you know, God has given all of us everything we need to be busy in this world. But I'm going to tell you, Sojourner thinks she done talked long enough. Now, they're going to tell me about it. But let me tell you, you might not see me. But every once in a while, I'll be sitting among you. You might not see me. But if you're here to hear and hear, I'll be sitting among you. And every once in a while, Sojourner will come out and tell you what time of night it is. I thank you for your hearing.
Good evening. My name is Harriet Tubman. Wasn't always Harriet Tubman. When I was born, I was born, they called me Arminta Ross. And I was born in the state of Maryland, a state that was truly kissed by God. But it had a stain again it, a stain of slavery. Now, I was born into that thing they call slavery. I was held in bondage for many a years. I did not say that I was anybody's slave. I said I was born into bondage, because slavery is not always being bound and chained. Slavery is when they take your mind and control what you have to think and what you have to say. Oh yeah, I was born into that system they call slavery, where somebody that looked like me couldn't go to school, where somebody that looked like me didn't have the right to speak unless they was given the okay. But in that silence that they placed me in, that silence they placed me in gave me time to think. And it gave me time to talk to God, even as a young child. I would say to God sometime, God, why is it that you put me on this earth to suffer the things that I do suffer? Why? I didn't get an answer then, but I got an answer later. But let me tell you a story about a little girl about 6 years old. I don't know how old I was because I don't know when my birthday is. But I imagine I was about 6 years old. And I was hired out to work. And the person that they had me hired out to put me to work checking muskrat traps. And if you know anything about muskrat, you know that they build their nests right along the water's edge. And they are at their best when it's cold during the winter, because then they have the real thick hide. But what the folk would do would set traps out to catch the muskrat. And it was for me to check the trap. Now, to check the trap means that I got to get in the water. Now, it get cold in Maryland. And when it's really cold, the top layer of water gets a little icy. But I got to check the traps. Now, we didn't have very good clothes then. Mostly dressed in rags. Mostly no shoes, especially as a child. But I have to check the traps. And I carry with me a little stick. And sometimes that's to fight off critters. And sometimes it'll help me get what I need. But this time, the stick was to crack the ice so that I could check the traps. So I took my stick and I cracked the ice, and it's cold, and I don't want to get into the water, but I know that if I don't check the traps, I get a lashing. So I put my foot and I take it back. It's cold. So I put my foot back in there again and I take it out and I look around and I said, if I don't check these traps. I know I'm going to get the lashing of my life. So I put my foot in there, water, and I walk through that icy water, and I reach around and feel to see if any muskrat had been caught up in a trap. Well, muskrat, if they trap, vicious fighters. Vicious sometimes like people who are placed in bondage. One day, there was a muskrat in the trap. And I carry with me a burlap bag so that when I take the muskrat out of the trap, I can slip them into the bag to keep them from biting and scratching. So I slip that muskrat into that bag. And I'm looking at that bag with that muskrat in it. And that muskrat is struggling to be free. It is clawing and it is scratching. And it is squirming because it wants to be free. And I looked at that muskrat and I say to myself, it want to be free, just like me. So you know what I did? I let that muskrat go. Because I know what it be like to want to be free king. So I let it go. And I prayed to God that nobody see me let that muskrat go, but I suppose my prayer was answered because I didn't get a lashing that day. But I tell you time that I did get a lashing. I got a lashing when I was hired out to nurse a baby. Now the reason why I didn't do any more muskrat catching is because I almost caught my death of pneumonia. And they say I wasn't good enough to do that no more, so they give me something else to do. And so I had to watch the Mrs. Baby. And the missus say to me, you need to watch my baby and don't let this baby cry. Now she always would sleep with her whip across her bed. And the baby's crib was down at the bottom of her bed. And when it was time to go to sleep, this is when she said, don't let that baby cry. Because all during the day, I'm playing with the baby. So it don't matter. But when it come nightfall, when it's time for everybody to be asleep, little Arminta couldn't go to sleep. So I'm at the foot of that bed and I'm rocking the cradle. I'm rocking that cradle because I got to keep that baby quiet. And as long as I'm rocking that cradle, that baby be all right. But then I get sleepy too. I'm about 6 years old. The missus is asleep, and everybody else is asleep. But I got to rock that cradle to keep that baby from crying. So I drift off to sleep. And you know what happened? The cradle is not rocking no more. And then the baby wakes up. And the baby begin to cry. And the missus wake up. And the missus said to me, didn't I tell you to keep that baby quiet? And so, because I'm not allowed to speak, I say nothing. But then she reaches up over her bed, and she grabs that whip, and she begins to lash and lash no matter where. Got these scars to show it. So as I get older, I keep asking God, why? And God don't answer. But one day, I said, I'm not going to be in bondage no more. I'm going to leave. And with the help of some good people, I left. And when I reached that Pennsylvania line, everything seemed so brand new. Seems like the sun was a different shining. And seems like the leaves on the trees was a whole new green. Because I had set myself free from bondage. Now I'm here today to tell you a little bit about Frederick Douglass and what he meant to me. Fred Douglass was also born in the state of Maryland. Fred Douglass also was one that freed himself from bondage. We went our different ways, but yet we were still comrades in the struggle for freedom. He did his speaking and his writing, and I did my personal deliverance by going back to Maryland and getting people out of bondage and bringing them to the north for freedom. It takes money to do that. And I had this friend of mine, Miss Sarah Bradford, to write me a book. And she had wrote a book before, but the second book, she said, Harriet, my name's no longer Arminta because I changed my name. I become who I want to become. And she said, you need somebody to vouch for you these stories that you tell. And so I asked a few friends of mine to send letters to her. And one of those friends was Frederick Douglass. And he sent a letter to vouch for me. Now, like I said before, I can't read. But I see some friends of mine, I'm a Zionite, but I see some friends of mine from Zion Church right here in this town. And I'm going to ask that pastor if he will come up and read this letter for me that Frederick Douglass wrote. Can you come up, sir? Y'all give him a hand. He gonna tell you who he is and where he's from and all of that. And then he gonna read this letter for me that I can't read for myself.
Good afternoon. Reverend Terrence King, pastor of the historic St. James Amy Zion Church here in Ithaca, New York, where Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman were known to visit and frequent oftenly. Thank you for this opportunity. Dear Harriet, I am glad to know that the story of your eventful life has been written by a kind lady, and that the same is soon to be published. You ask for what you do not need when you call upon me for a word of commendation. I need such words from you far more than you can than you can need them from me, especially where your superior labors and devotion to the cause of the lately enslaved of our land are known as I know them. The difference between us is very marked. Most that I have done and suffered in the service of our cause has been in public, and I have received much encouragement at every step of the way. You, on the other hand, have labored in a private way. I have wrote in the day, you in the night. I have had the applause of the crowd and the satisfaction that comes of being approved by the multitude, while the most that you have done have been witnessed by a few trembling, scared, and footsore bandmen and women whom you have led out of the house of bondage and whose heartfelt "God bless you" has been your only reward. The midnight sky and the silent tears have been the witness of our devotion to freedom and of our heroism. Excepting John Brown of sacred memory, I know of no one who has willingly encountered more perils and hardships to serve our enslaved people than you have. Much that you have done would seem improbable to those who do not know you as I know you. It is to me a great pleasure and great privilege to bear testimony to your character and your works, and to say to those to whom you may come that I regard you in every way truthful and trustworthy. Your friend, Frederick Douglass.
Freedom is what we work together and struggle together for. And in order to keep that freedom, you must keep vigilance. Because slavery has a way to sneak up on you when you're not paying attention and overcome you. But I'm here today to tell you to keep your lamps trimmed and burning. That means always be watchful for those things that might ensnare and enslave you. Keep your lamp trimmed and burning. 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 The time is drawing nigh. Children, don't get weary. Children, don't get weary. Children, don't get weary till your work is done. Oh, keep your lamp trimmed and burning. Keep your lamp trimmed and burning. Keep your lamp trimmed and burning. The time is drawing nigh. God bless you.
Good afternoon. I am Anna Murray Douglas, and I stopped by just to share some information with you about my life with Frederick. Now, folks don't know it. Most folks don't know. Me and Frederick, we're partners. Partners in the struggle. Oh, I know there have been folks around didn't think Frederick should be married to me. But see, we were partners. Been that way since we first met up. Let me tell you. Now, I was born in Maryland, too. Oh, Sister Harriet, I was born in Maryland, too. Denton, Maryland, to be exact. And you know, I was the first one of my parents' children born free. Born free. And when I turned 17, I decided right then, you know it was three. It was my sister Charlotte, my sister Elizabeth, and my brother Philip. We decided that we would leave home for a better life. And we went to Baltimore. Now, when I got to Baltimore, I started working I worked for about 2 families there. Now, the first family was the Montel family. And I worked for them for 2 years, you know. And while I was working for folks, I realized that managing a household was my gift. I was good at managing a household. And I left the Montel family and went to work for the Wells family. I worked for them for about 5 years. Oh, every time I think of them, it brings such joy to my heart because they were such fine people. And my travels throughout Baltimore, I met Frederick. And we were friends. And I know you wouldn't, yes, we fell in love. Now, I'll tell you something. Frederick was busy in the church, too. And one weekend, he decided to go to a camp meeting. Now, he went to the camp meeting because, you see, let me tell you now, I forgot to tell you that Frederick was such a smart fella that he made a deal with his so-called owner. And the deal was that Frederick could hire him his own labor out. He could go work for folks, and any money he made over $3, he could keep for himself. Pretty smart, huh? So, that weekend, he decided to go to camp meeting. Well, camp meeting got so good, Frederick decided that he would stay on till Monday. The problem was he's supposed to pay his so-called owner that Saturday. Well, he came back that Monday, and I tell you something, Mr. All, he was so angry. Oh, he called Frederick all types of names, told him he was going to beat him, told him he was going to sell him. Well, let me tell you something. We took Mr. All at his word. We believed that he would beat him. We believed that he would sell Frederick further south. Now, I had already introduced Frederick to some friends, because you know, Baltimore had many free colored folks that lived there. And so 3 of our friends and Frederick and me, we got together and we started coming up with a plan for Frederick to get his freedom. Now, one gave Frederick his seaman protection papers. The other one let Frederick hold his horse and buggy. And me, well, I sold Frederick a sailor suit, because you know, Frederick knew how those sailors walked and talked. And I tell you, and I gave him all the money that I had saved, because when I worked for the Montel and the Wells family, I lived in their house so I could save my money. And that Monday morning, I will never forget it, September 3rd, 1838. Frederick, we met right down from the train station. Now, we were scared now, because you know, if the authorities had found out what we were doing, well, I guess you know what, they would have put us all in prison. And then they would have sent Frederick further south, would have sold him. But you know, we trusted God. We trusted God, and we were praying. And on that morning, I went to work just like I always do. But I was scared, I was nervous. Now, the other part of the plan was that Frederick would get word back to me when he arrived in New York City. When I got word that Frederick had made it to New York City, you know what I did? I started packing up everything I could. I sold the other feather bed that I had, because you see, I had sold one for Frederick to give him money. So the other one, I sold it. I started packing up knives, forks, spoons, linen, everything. I had packed up up enough stuff to fill 2 rooms in a house. And the most important thing I packed up was my wedding dress. Yes, beautiful plum color. And when I arrived in New York City, September 15, 1838, we were married by Reverend Pennington. And then we had friends that told us, you know, you should choose another name. And we did. So you told us also, go to New Bedford. Frederick can find work there. And we did. And Frederick began to work, and I was binding shoes, and I'm a seamstress, so I was doing many different things. Well, our family began to grow. Rosetta, our daughter, was born there. Lewis Henry was born there, our son, and Frederick Jr. All 3 of them was born in New Bedford. So you know, Frederick had went to the church and was telling people about slavery and how his life. And he met someone and told him, said, you should come to Lynn and speak on that. And that's what he did. And you know, we moved to Lynn, and I joined the Anti-Slavery Society meeting. I had many friends there, many friends there. But you know, as Frederick started making the speeches, folks wanted to hear about slavery because, you know, they knew it was wrong. They wanted to hear his life. And Frederick was gone. He was beginning to travel, you know, and I had many friends, such wonderful friends. They would come over and help me with my chores in my house and help me with the children so I would be able to attend the meetings. When Frederick came and shared with me that he wanted us to move to Rochester, well, this is for the ladies. I had many friends in Lynn. I would have been perfectly happy staying in Lynn. But what do, ladies? We support our husbands. And we're partners. Me and Frederick are partners. My job is to take care of the children, manage the household, and Frederick's job is to go out and tell people about the evils of slavery. Now, we moved to Rochester. I wasn't that fond of Rochester initially. We moved in a tenement house there. And we were able finally to buy a home from an abolitionist in Rochester. Well, this house had 9 rooms, a porch, and where I could, well, I was always so busy, I rarely got to sit. But it had a yard, and I could plant my flowers in my garden. And that's when folks started coming to our home and visiting. We had many visitors. Even our freedom seekers came. And Frederick would go and play the violin, and the children in the neighborhood would come under the window and they would listen. So when we bought the farm on South Avenue, then we were able to help even more freedom seekers and even more guests. Oh, we had guests. Some came and stayed for months. Some came and stayed for years. But I was always a wonderful host. Now, you know, our daughter, youngest daughter, was born in Rochester. She was born when we lived on Alexander Street. Such a wonderful child. And you know, one of those guests that would come and visit and stay quite a long time was John Brown. And he had such a wonderful relationship with my daughter Annie. And you know, another friend who I'm sure you might not know about, but we do know is Shields Green, another one of the friends that would come to our home and talk. Well, I tell you, John Brown was there planning, making plans for what he had planned to do. And he and Frederick talked length about that. Well, he wanted Frederick to go along with him, but Frederick thought that was not such a good idea. Well, you know, when John Brown finally did blow up the arsenal or attack the arsenal, Frederick, someone sent word to him that they thought he was a part of it. Well, I tell you, he had to leave town. He had to go away. And the children were so afraid. I was afraid. What if they caught him? Would I ever see him again? What would I do? But he did make it safely over to Europe. Little Annie, she was so upset about her father having to leave. And then while her father was away, John Brown was hung, and that affected her. And she wrote her father a letter, and Rosetta, my daughter, read it to me, and she let me know that she was telling her father about what those mean men had done to John Brown. And then the good part is that she was telling her father how she was learning to speak German, and that the next letter she would send him, she would write it in German. But you know, as time went on, I began to look at my daughter, my little one, and she began to look as if she didn't feel well, and her energy was leaving her. And we had the doctor take a look at her, and the doctor, the only thing he could say that maybe it was some brain disease. But you know, as a mother, I felt that her heart was broken. And then 10 days before my little Annie was to turn 11, March 13, 1860, God called my baby home. There was no time for me to mourn. Frederick was in Europe. We had never bought a family plot. We had not bought a family plot at that time. But you know, God is good because he provided us with wonderful friends who helped me lay our daughter to rest. And on the day that we were to lay her to rest, as we entered Mount Hope Cemetery, I looked back and I could see the long line of carriages. All those people came to honor our little girl. After the funeral, some folks said it was like 35 carriages. And as we entered the cemetery, the thing that came to my mind was the remembrance of when Annie and her father would take strolls in Mount Hope Cemetery. And on that day, this would be her final resting place. Losing a child is one of the hardest things that a mother will ever have to endure. And I was never able to feel the joy that I had felt before her death. And 12 years after my baby, was called home. Our home on South Avenue burned down. And again, Frederick was away. Remember, we're partners. We're partners in the struggle. His job is to go and tell people about slavery, raise money, change laws. My job is to manage the house, take care of the children. And when the fire came, we had to rush and try to save papers, his papers and all those things. And Rosetta was living with us at the time and make sure that the children were safe. And Frederick was in Washington, D.C. And he had already purchased a home there. So I decided that I would go to Washington. And we thought about rebuilding here in Rochester. We thought about that. But the more we thought about it, after a year, we decided and we contacted a friend and we had them to sell the property. Rochester will always be our home. But the time had come that there were things that we needed to do in Washington. Frederick had other things that had to get done. And so we moved to Washington, and I began to do exactly what I did here. Manage my household, make sure things were taken care of, and support and still be that partner to Frederick that we agreed upon September 15, 1838. Thank you for listening. We are here because of the two of them and all the input and the love and the information and knowledge that they have agreed to share with us, and we honor them.
I want to know how the research was done to each person do the research
study these people that we portray, they become part of us. And as we stand up and share information about them, I'll speak for myself as far as Anna Murray Douglas. I feel her. I have come to know her, and I've come to appreciate her. And so that, for me, that is something that's very important, so I appreciate you saying. You ladies can speak to that if you want.
Well, for me, it's pretty much the same. I read everything I can think of with Sojourner Truth. And even though she was born here in the state of New York, and I was born in the low country of South Carolina where the Gullah dialect is spoken so rhythmically, but she reminds me of my grandmother. And it's just things about her, that feistiness, no nonsense, tell you just what's on her mind. And I admire her because even though she didn't read or write, but she had people to read the Bible to her. And she refused to have, as she said, the adults to interpret what it said. She relied on, as she said, the Holy Spirit. But she just wanted to, and she could quote scripture right on point as to whatever might be going on in the community or in any kind of situation. She could bring scripture to it and really quiet them down. She said that she sings a hymn or says something from the Bible. But she was always not really attacked, but they didn't want her to speak. But she spoke.
Are there any other questions?
I wondered, Ms. Tubman, when you saw the film Harriet, did it relate, did it ring true to what you knew about yourself? No.
It was embellished a little too much.
Too much.
I don't think that they brought her character, her struggle. I don't think that they captured her personality or her struggles. They kind of glossed over a lot of things. It was painful to watch. Some of the songs that they had, I mean, it is a movie, so they had to do what they had to do. But some of the songs that they sang original songs rather than some of the spirituals that Harriet would have incorporated in her study, in her message. That I was asked to sing one of those songs from the movie, and I said, Harriet in me said no. And the Harriet in me says, if you ask me to sing Deep River, I'll sing it. If you ask me to sing Keep Your Lamps Trimmed and Burning, I'll sing it. If you ask me to sing There's a Spirit in Me, I'll sing it. But don't ask me to sing that newfangled stuff that had nothing to do with her spirit.
I'm curious, in your research, and this question goes to any one of you on the panel, but in your research of your characters, were there discoveries that really enlightened you or changed your thoughts about that character or about that time? Or was there anything that you learned that kind of changed you in a way that you move forward in your life?
Well, for me,
Could you turn on your, hold it down.
Hi, excuse me. For me, there was really only two references to Betsy Bailey. Betsy Bailey was talked about in Frederick Douglass's autobiography, but he had four, so he mentioned her in most of those autobiographies. And then there was a book called The Woman in Frederick Douglass's Life, which tells a little bit more about her, and that's all I can get for my character. So what I rely on is what a grandmother would do in those times, a grandmother who's limited in her power and her authority, what she can do, what she can say, and how she can help her grandchildren. So I didn't have much to go on for my character.
Well, I did quite a bit of research. When I joined Akwaaba, and I call these my mentors because I'm the young one in the group. When I joined Akwaaba, Mrs. Anderson said to me, why don't you try out for Harriet? And I said, oh no, not Harriet. Because to me, she was something special. I mean, I knew just from the little bit that I did know about her that there was a spirit in her that would, if I caught a hold of it, that would propel me into some place I didn't know whether I'd be able to handle it or not. So she said, go ahead and try it. So I tried it, and then she said, you are Harriet. And so I began to do the research on Harriet. And the more I studied Harriet, the more I realized that I had more of her in common than I thought. Because the struggle is not over. And so I saw the fight in her. I saw the spirit in her, and I saw the love of God in her that kept her going in the way that she knew she had to. And there were times that she neglected herself. And every time people put a limit on her, you're not big enough, you're not strong enough, you're not smart enough, you're a woman, she would break those bounds. She was one of the first women to serve in war, in battle. How awesome is that? I mean, right now, even today, women don't go to battle. But she went to battle. She was actually out there on the fields doing whatever it was that she needed to do. So that strength in her just captured me and made me want to do more and do better.
As Reverend Maggie said, Dr. Anderson and Mrs. Anderson, they have a gift. I don't even know if they really kind of realize it. They suggested that I try to portray Anna Murray Douglas. And it is one of the best things that I've ever attempted to do. And as I was researching her, I began to understand, you know, people, number one, Frederick Douglass would never be free without her. He would not be the man that he became without her. He would never been able to continue to be the man without her, because he did not have to worry about one single thing when it came to home. There was an instance where Anna Murray Douglass, they were sitting in the parlor, and because when Frederick was away, he would always send money back home if he could. So they were sitting in the parlor. She gets up, she goes over to the bureau, she brings out the bank book. Now she gives him the bank book, and as he looked at it, she had deposited money into that account. She had deposited money that he sent home in that account, and she had not incurred not one single bill. Now, when people portrayed her, they want to portray her as this ignorant woman. Ignorant people can't do that kind of thing. This woman was smart. So, the more I got to know her, I realized what an awesome person she is, how smart she was, how she loved the Lord, and she was bent on treating people the way she wanted to be treated. So, and Frederick knew the woman he had. You know, I mean, when she passed away, Frederick almost lost his mind. He really suffered a great deal, because to him, Anna was that, as he put it, that pillow, that post, and that held up his family. And when he came home, Anna was home to him. So I was really pleasantly surprised, because I went in thinking, this woman, she took this, she took that, you know. They were partners. each had their job to do, and they did it very well. And when they came back in their home, you know, home to them was each other. So yes, I love her, and I always ask her, one of their descendants, if he is pleased with how I portray his ancestor. And he always support me and tell me that he is, and that means everything to me.
Now, I don't know how I became sojourner. I don't know. I don't know how I became sojourner. I sing that, no. They allowed me to sing with the Akwaaba African American Women's Gospel Choir. And when I came in, I was supposed to be there for the spoken word, as they say. And then, I really don't know. Ruth, how did I?
I think it went from there. It went from us being in coma, me seeing you in a coma, and becoming a part of the coma. And I said, she's sojourner, isn't she?
So but I fell in love with sojourner. You know, when I think about someone who's 9 years old and being sold away so early, and you're being mistreated, and just have to think for yourself. I think of myself at 9 years old. You know, would you have been able to do all those kinds of things, and just to see that I guess they really didn't even want her to have a book, because she would have had a PhD back in 1700 and something. Because she was a brilliant woman. She would have them to read the Bible to her. And adults, all of a sudden, they would read, and then they would decide that they're going to interpret what it said. But she didn't want that, so she would have the children to read, because they wanted to read and reread and read. But if you could see how she could stand up in my research, stand up in any kind of gathering, and someone, you know, she got cat calls. Like she would say sometimes she'd go in to a meeting or a conference or whatever they might be having, and she walk in and she think that she is in a hen house. So much cackling, everybody didn't want her to speak. But when she finished speaking, and she might raise a hymn or two, as they say, and she brought in scripture, she said it just seemed as though there was a cool breeze as she was leaving to sit back at her desk, because she knew scripture and could put people in place. You know, she said, you know, they come there with theirs, and there's one thing, but the "and a woman," now that's another thing in itself. She was born in New York State, so she did not have a dialect like that. And when that came up, it's very popular, you know, in the research, very popular, but that was written probably 12 years after she made that speech in Akron, Ohio. So Maris Robinson was the one who captured what she said. And so a lot of things that was said, you know, they want to make it popular. So the research is so rich. Ms. Anderson, Ruth sent something to me from the Schomburg. And that court hearing that she won in 1828, I think February 22nd, it is just being published. They're just finding it, New York State Archives. And I had it printed out from the rare books of Rochester's library. And it's really something, just to think how long that's been around. You know, she won that case in 1827. And they're just finding it. It is awesome. But that's Sojourner. I'll tell you, she reminded me of the people in my family, because they would shut you down. And she was like that. And she used scripture. And you know, sometimes the clergy would come in and saying what she shouldn't be up there and a woman not supposed to be. She brought it in. And so it would give them to think. So I'm quite sure they sort of slunk back and said, because she said she believed, let the Holy Spirit interpret. And she said, I talked to God, and God talked to me. Amen. That's what she did. And when she waited on God to speak to her, everything went well. But when she moved on her own mind, she noticed it. But from 9 years old, no one to direct her because her parents were gone. But just, all right, they're telling me, all right. So
Because
don't let me preach.
I know, you know, and it is amazing because we all love our characters, the people that we've researched and gotten to know, that we just get so excited. And we often tease Sojourner because once Sojourner get going, well, it's over. So we are so grateful that you invited us here, and we hope that we did share information about our people, that maybe some new information, and also encourage you that if it's things that we shared with you, to go look it up and just be your own researchers.
Hello. Just another. We just thank you for that round, and let's hear another round. And Reverend King, very happy to have you join us too. And one thing I'd like to say that is carrying us up to the 21st century. We all know how women have been as important as these women in Frederick Douglass's life, but they don't get credit for it. And just recently, people in Ithaca have developed a movie on the life of Dorothy Cotton. And you know, many of us in this room have had relationships with Dorothy Cotton. And in the history of the civil rights movement in the middle of the 20th century, she was one of the key players. But she wasn't recognized because she was a woman. If she had been a man and did everything that she did, then her name would be all over the places. And if you haven't seen the movie, go see the movie. Find out how to do it.
I just want to thank my Zionite sisters and brothers for coming and participating. And we're all Zionites, by the way. Memorial AME Zion Church. Yeah. So thank you.
So we have refreshments.